you're on, we're on.
Everyone, take your seats. So there's intros happening for those folks while I'm doing this intro. They're getting a different intro, I'm told. So my pleasure to introduce our presenters this evening. Maybe there are some folks, young folks, there's a lot of young folks here who don't know the guy on the right. Most everybody else who's into Buddhist meditation knows him. That's that's Jack Kornfield, founder of Spirit Rock, along with a few other people, and somebody who's probably been as impactful as anyone in the West as far as Buddhist meditation goes. There's a slew of his books in the bookstore, and besides all the wisdom and love that he's shared, he's a really good guy. I'll say, how's that? And over here is here for our program together is Rajiv Joshi, who I've just met since we've been here and really have enjoyed him. And I'm going to read, if it's okay, just to, because I don't want to, I want to be accurate. But I did watch some videos of him, and this guy's been around and can make a difference in the world. But here's a little bit about him. Economist, community organizer, entrepreneurial leader working at the intersection of environment, social, and economic justice. Born in Scotland to Kenyan and Indian parents, twice elected to represent young people nationally. He's directed the world's largest global South-led alliance to end poverty, is a steward of climate action initiatives worldwide, and a co-architect of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. He's the lead author of The Decisive Decade Inquiry, commissioned by Christiana Figueres, who will be speaking tomorrow night from Costa Rica, and Global Climate Philanthropy. He's supported campaigns to phase out fossil fuels, transform food systems, halt biodiversity loss, and mobilize climate finance. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks so much
Thank
for
you, James.
your evening.
James is a dear friend and a co-founder of Spirit Rock, who's been also a very important force within the Buddhist world and community on service and climate care. I think I'll call it that. And I just met Rajiv, and we've had a conversation for half an hour or so. He's cool. And he's done amazing things. So this is a Monday night class that I have led for close to 40 years weekly, and then dropping back a bit the last couple of years. I've been doing it monthly, and ordinarily we'll do a longer meditation and then have some teachings and some dialogue, but tonight it will be a different game. In addition to it being the Monday night class for you who are online and all of you who are here, the room is filled with 100 or more folks who are in residence here at Spirit Rock for a climate week of spiritual practice, visionary work to how to hold and deal with climate change, and how do we support one another in this huge transformation time in the world. And Rajiv and I don't have a plan, which is always interesting, actually. You know, it's a little less predictable, and that makes it more interesting. But I'll start with a little bit of a few words, and then I have a meditation but I'll also invite you to say something after I start before we go into our little meditation. And part of what the work of this conference and Spirit Rock's relationship to the climate world and the climate crisis is what I would call inner climate change. It's very clear that no amount of technology, no amount of internet and AI and computers and nanotechnology and space technology and biotechnology and all these other things that we're ensconced in that are growing is going to stop continuing warfare, is going to stop continuing racism, is going to stop climate disruption, is going to stop the kinds of conflicts we have in the world, because all of those have their roots in the human heart. And without an inner transformation, the outer one will not happen. And so we're hoping that our contribution, and thank you again, Rajiv, for coming and being part, is the practices and the perspectives of inner climate as well as outer. Then I want to start with a couple of short poems, because art and poetry and language are as important to transformation as anything so-called rational. First, a poem that I believe gives great hope. It's only one line. Perched upon the muzzle of a cannon, a yellow butterfly is slowly opening and shutting its wings. And this is the world we live in. Yes, there are the cannons, and the butterfly says, forget that. Here I am, baby. You know, there's something bigger going on even than the cannons. And the next poem really comes from your original innocence, because when we let ourselves look and our eyes and hearts open to what's happening in the world, we can't help but being touched if we allow that original innocence, what you spoke of in our few minutes ago about beginner's mind. It's a poem by Fadi Judah called Mimesis. My daughter wouldn't hurt a spider that had nested between her bicycle handles. For 2 weeks, she waited until it left of its own accord. If you tear down the web, I said, it will simply know this isn't a place to call home, and you'd get to go biking. She said, that's how others become refugees, isn't it? So these are things that touch us because we actually know this. And we get busy and the world overwhelms us, or all the things we have to tend to. And part of the invitation of inner climate change is to realize that we already know in our hearts what matters, and let that be a place that guides us. And it's also the reason that contemplative and inner practices are tremendously helpful. I guess I'll say one more thing and then make some time for you, Rajiv. My beloved wife, Trudy, and I have been working the last few years at the Oslo Freedom Forum. And this takes place in Oslo, where the Nobel Prize is awarded. But instead of it bringing one person who becomes the laureate, they bring together 50 people who are all eligible for the Nobel Prize. And it's an amazing group because a lot of them, have you been there? It's quite amazing to be in the company. Half of them have been in prison, lots have been tortured, and they're working in the roughest places in the world against the imprisonment of people in places of dictatorship, whether it's Venezuela or whether it's in, in Myanmar or whether it's in Sudan or places where their lives are really at risk. And in the last few years, they've invited Trudy and I and a couple of other good friends who are trauma experts, such as Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine, who are also great trauma people, because the activists burn out, get lost, lose some of the well-being and spirit. And I remember working with this one activist who is a celebrated and very powerful organizer in South America to save the rainforests, organized 1 million students in her country to do things and so forth. But whenever the next big burning of the rainforest happens and she hears about it, she gets sick. And I said, you know, the fire in the rainforest belongs there, and it's not helpful for you to carry it in your body. And then she said, well, how do I do this? Because her care is also a kind of porosity that she's willing to feel that deeply. And so we did a series of practices of how she could work sweeping through body, offering things to Mother Earth, practicing compassion, but also equanimity, ways of creating balance, making a big altar and putting all the gods she'd ever heard of. There's Kuan Yin and Mother Mary and Guadalupe. And I said, you need Kali on there, baby, for what you're dealing with. You know, put them all on there. And then each day light a candle and say, okay, you hold this with me so I don't have to carry it in my body. So all these ways, ritual and inwardly, if we're to sustain the work and keep our connection to the natural world and to the things that we most care about. So again, inner climate change becomes inseparable from outer climate change, and inner climate healing becomes inseparable from outer climate healing. So those are a few, laying out a little territory. What do you think? What would you add, or what questions do you think we should consider tonight, or anything else? Your favorite recipe, whatever. Hi, Mom. I'm on stage. It's okay.
Time.
My daughter used to call me, and I'd forget to turn my phone off, and I'd be in the middle of this whole huge thing, and she said, "Dad, you didn't turn your phone off." Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to this community and to the land that's holding us. And just to imagine how much has gone into creating a space like this. It's almost a miracle to believe how these things just manifest. And it actually gives you hope that if such beautiful spaces like this can be manifest all over the world, then perhaps we still have some hope on our side. So Jack asked me just to speak a little bit about my own story. I'll share a little bit of my own realization that the inner climate is as important, if not more, than the outer system that so many of us spend our lives trying to transform. And I began very young. I was in Scotland trying to ensure we had free, healthy school meals. I remember being in a small school in Scotland and 6 what we call chips. You call them French fries here in America. I got 6 chips and a little dollop of beans on my plate. And I remember thinking, this can't be very healthy. And at home in Indian families, we would have dal and a lot of lentils and vegetarian meals. And I went to my headmaster, Mr. Green was his name. And I remember, for some reason, I have this image of a big green armchair. I don't know if there was a green armchair. Perhaps it was just my fear to say, is there any way we could have a say in what we have to eat? And a few weeks went by, and all of a sudden we got these forms, and they asked me to help make these forms. That we filled these forms, and then it turned out that we as young people wanted to eat healthier food than what they were producing. And that became the Free Healthy School Meals campaign in the UK. And so I started to see that, well, actually, our action can actually make some kind of a difference. And I was still quite young. I was maybe 16, 17. My father passed away, had a sudden heart attack in Kenya. And in my suffering or in my sorrow, the insight that came to me was, life is short. How do we use as much of our life as possible to do the maximum possible good? And so I threw everything that I had into activism and organizing, and Scotland finally got a little bit of power from Westminster, and we got our own parliament. And one day before that, we started the first youth parliament, the largest democratically elected group of young people in Europe, and we managed to get rid of tuition fees in schools, and we banned smoking in public places, and we got Scotland to put forward the boldest climate targets, and all of this before it hosted its COP.
This is just his beginning.
And life was, it was all about trying to drive change in the world. I know many of us believe that that's why we're here. We're here to make a difference. We look at our children and we look at the world around us and think, how can we not try to do something about the state of the world, particularly right now, this poly crisis that we've talked about today. And it wasn't until a few years later, by this point, in 2005, Scotland played host to the G8 summit, and Nelson Mandela and a number of Southern civil society leaders approached us as youth leaders to say, can you help us build what was the global call to action against poverty, the anti-poverty movement? And we said, of course, and we organized in the streets. Hundreds of thousands of people marched around the world. We had concerts for Live Aid. And at the end of this process, Mandela was the chair of a group called the Elders. We'd had a financial crisis, a food crisis. The Copenhagen talks had collapsed in 2009. Many of us felt that the plan A of business as usual was just not working, and we needed a plan B. And so I joined this effort to create a group of morally conscious business leaders, which Mandela and other leaders around the table, Archbishop Tutu, felt we needed to find these conscious leaders to create an organization called the B Team. And in 2015, many of us were working with our kind of nailed to the grinder. We had the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and I was in Italy at the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Retreat Center. We had a meeting of a small group of leaders of some of the world's largest companies, former heads of state, the head of the World Trade Organization, and we were having a conversation about how can we address the climate crisis on the one hand and address systemic inequality on the other hand. And at the beginning of that conversation, which I was to facilitate, I had a massive seizure and I collapsed. And I spent 7 days in hospital. I could not move. The doctors thought perhaps, it was very close. And coming out of that process, the biggest insight that I had was we were focusing so much on sustainability, on systems change, but we had forgotten entirely about personal sustainability. And so for me, the opportunity to be here and the opportunity I've had with Christiana and Brother Faphu and Brother Spirit and others with the Plum Village community to come together as a community of practice, to understand what does it mean to practice regeneration in our own lives, is the biggest opportunity. And as I'll maybe close on this, the inspiration was when Thich Nhat Hanh said, the next Buddha is a Sangha. And I think, the fact that we're here together today in this moment, and that many others are gathering all over the world, in sanghas, in communities, it gives us hope. And perhaps in each moment, we shouldn't forget that the hope that will manifest the future is present.
Thank you. And thank you for speaking so personally. There's a way in which when you speak personally, I and others, we lean in. It's not like some philosophy, but what have you lived? And part of what I feel as I listen to you and think about your last decades of work is hopeful. Hopeful, I think Wendell Berry, the poet, said to be hopeful though you have considered the facts, right? That there's something even in what you say about what's possible. We'll do a meditation in a couple of minutes. One of our common friendships also is with Paul Hawken. And Paul's extraordinary climate work has, in the recent years, created two very big books and programs, one Drawdown, and then one Regeneration. And for those who don't know this New York Times bestselling book, Drawdown, hi, Mom. What Paul did with a whole team of scientists and scholars and so forth around the world, he got people from universities all around and climate scientists, so forth, is to analyze the possible solutions to climate change and to analyze with great care how much would they cost, how effective would they be, how many gigatons of carbon would they pull out of the environment or the atmosphere in the next decade, how feasible are they? And then they were ranked in order. So it's really kind of marching orders. If you want to change the world, it's not some, okay, what a beautiful idea, let's make change, how to do it, the things that matter. And of course, there are some ones that we've learned about, management of food, because food waste is an enormous piece of it. Naturally, there's the ones about how we generate power and the benefits of wind power and solar power and so forth. You'd think they'd be at the top of the things that would make the biggest difference. They're not. Do you know what's at the top? Women and children. The empowerment of women, the education of children, the support of that in communities would be more effective than all the wind power and solar power you could build. Just take a moment to take that in. That we have the capacity as human beings to transform, and the field of transformation is there when we understand really where it matters. And the way that we empower one another, the dream that we have of what it means to be, in fact, truly uplifting, starts with that. And I find this to be remarkably empowering to read it. And even though some days it feels like we're in the old handbasket, going somewhere, in fact, there's another kind of basket weaving, the weaving that brings together human beings from the women who give birth to the world. Just in case you forgot that, right? That's where you came from. It's the weirdest thing. Every one of you came out of some woman's body. Seriously. How's that, Mr. Buddha? Yeah, he remembers, right? This is actually what life does. It recreates itself. And the science now says this is the place where the recreation has to happen. And of course, it has to happen in community as well. One more thing to say before we do a meditation. It's easy to become despairing, and maybe we'll talk about that later in this conference, because the news can be overwhelming. Basically, I'd say turn it off most of the time. You turn it on about 5% and you'll get the main point, and then you don't need to hear it again and again. It's not good for your nervous system. We can be despairing, although the great explorer Wade Davis says despair is a failure of imagination. That in fact there are other possibilities, as regeneration speaks to. One of our colleagues and teachers, founding teachers here at Spirit Rock, Wes Nisker, who died a couple of years ago, very dear friend, he went to interview Gary Snyder. Gary Snyder was an early environmentalist. He wrote Earth Household 50, 60 years ago, got the Pulitzer Prize for it, award-winning poet and activist and Zen master and all these things. He's in his 90s. And he went to see Gary, and he said, Gary, the oceans are rising. The species are being decimated. There's this huge movement of climate refugees. The world, the deserts are growing. The world is heating up. What advice do you have for us? And Gary, like all good Zen masters, got quiet and looked back and said, don't feel guilty. If you want to save it, don't save it out of guilt. Don't save it out of anger. Don't save it out of fear, because these are the very things that have created the problem, the fear, the guilt, the anger. He said, if you want to save it because you love it. It's the only power that can match the other powers that are causing the destruction. It's the power that has mothers lift cars off their kids. And this is really the root of the transformation, of the practices that we do, of the connection with the natural world, of the development of loving kindness and compassion as your birthright. This is the core of awakened spirituality in all the good traditions, in all the wise traditions, the indigenous traditions, and then the various religious traditions at their best. We know how that goes, right? But they have good parts. And then they have, what do they say? The other parts. But anyway. And you know this. I'm not saying anything that you don't know. There isn't any power bigger, because who you are in the end is love. You think you're this body, you think your emotions, they keep coming and going, and your body changes. It was a little kid, and then it got bigger and got pimples, and then it got even bigger, and it, became athletic, and it did its thing, or not athletic, or whatever, ashamed, whatever. Then it got middle-aged, and then it even lost its hair in some cases. I mean, it's not the same body. It keeps changing, right? So that's not who you are. Okay, your feelings. How many emotions have you had in the last week? Is that who you are? Come on. I mean, it's good to honor them. You want to feel them. Maybe they have information, but it's not your identity. How about your thoughts, your mind? The mind is such an amazing thing, right? And it keeps secreting thoughts like the salivary gland secretes saliva, and it won't stop, right? That's why people come to meditate. Can I stop it? Not very often, and that's not the point. Because who you are is consciousness. what was born into this body, what will leave it, what creates. You are the creative consciousness of the universe. And that's not divided. You can't divide yourself from the trees and the grasses and the worms. Without the worms, you wouldn't be here. They're your friends. They support you. The worms and the ants. Things wouldn't grow. You and the worms, brothers and sisters. Who would have thought, right? Who you are is the web of life that made some weird turn and created you, okay, for a time, only temporarily. But in fact, it's not you that. That's sort of life playing and saying, let me see if I can make somebody like James, or Alyssa or somebody, a very cool thing, nice production. And then it goes off stage. It's what it does, honestly. And I'm not saying this as a philosophy. When you get quiet, when you come on retreat and practice, in the silence, the sense of identity begins to dissolve. And the sense that this is who I am, all your ideas and your roles and your family and your culture and so forth, they're there, but they begin to drop away. And you come into a deeper silence that feels a communion with things that's not separate. And you stand in front of a tree. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I will. There's a woman who came on retreats here, and she had a very porous temperament. And she came to talk to me, and she said, I have this favorite tree, and I stand out there in the tree and I commune. And I'm like, I'm good with that, okay? And then she said, I even have orgasms. And I thought, oh, this is not standard Buddhist practice. But I was kind of happy for her at the same time. It was a great tree, I must admit. You are not this skin-encapsulated ego sense of self. You rent the body from Hertz for a while. You got to kind of keep it together, but it's not who you are. And when you get quiet, when you listen deeply, there comes a kind of freedom and love. You can't separate them because who you are is loving awareness. You're awareness, and because awareness is everything, you are consciousness. It's also called love. So let's do a little practice, and then maybe Rajiv will add other interesting things to the conversation. You who are online, you who are seated here, wherever you are, let yourself find a very simple, comfortable way to sit. Now, it turns out that in the Buddhist tradition, and I lived in the forest monasteries of Southeast Asia when the forests were still mostly there 60 years ago. Many of them have been cut down. That the Buddha was born under a tree, grew up under the trees, practiced under the tree, got enlightened under a tree, taught under the trees, and died under the two sal trees that immediately came into bloom as he lay down to die. He and the trees were one in some way. And in fact, it says in the story, these are beautiful myths, but they speak to us. After his enlightenment, he moved from the Bodhi tree, where you can still go see its great-granddaughter in India, and took a seat 100 yards away or some distance, and gazed at the tree for 7 days in gratitude for sheltering him and giving him the realization of all things being connected and the fact that we have freedom in the midst of it all. So let your eyes close gently and settle yourself. Sink down into your seat so there's a sense of stability. Take a couple of long breaths. Release tensions that you carry. Let your eyes and face be soft. Loosen the jaw. If you like, roll your head in a little circle to release your neck. Let it find a simple upright. Let the shoulders relax and the arms and hands rest easily. Let the belly be soft and the breath natural. And let the heart be soft as well. To be present with an open and kind awareness. And with this embodied presence, now we'll play with the amazing capacity of imagination and visualization as part of meditation. Let yourself imagine that you are a tree, not that you're sitting under the tree of enlightenment, but you're the tree. And feel or imagine or sense in any way you can that you have roots going down through your seat into Mother Earth, steady, unshakable. Feel the grounding and the support. For millions of years, you as trees have learned to do this. And now you as a tree extend your roots into the earth and feel her support, strength and steadiness. And then sense your body is the great trunk of the tree, upright, strong. A little flexible when the storms come. And feel your branches that reach out and reach up to the sky. Ordinarily, you have human arms, but you as a tree have these spreading branches. Imagine, feel, picture, sense. And you are in a beautiful season as a tree. Warm sunlight, enough rain. Feel the well-being of being part of the whole web of life. And you breathe in carbon dioxide, through all the little pores in your leaves. You take it in. And you breathe out oxygen for all the creatures of the forest and the earth. What a beautiful thing to do. And you open your leaves to the sunlight, and you have a magic power. For when the sunlight strikes your leaves, you turn the beautiful light energy into sugar in every leaf, turning light into sugar. That's why kids like sugar, because it's light. And you feel yourself connected to the world around you. The roots and mycelium around the roots connect you to the other trees of the land. You can send sugar to trees that are smaller, or children of yours, or trees in need. And you've been standing as a tree for millions of years. You know how to love this earth as a tree. And sometimes human beings come to sit underneath you. Some time ago, this fellow called the Buddha sat under one of your relatives. And you can feel what it's like to shelter those human beings who wish to awaken. The warmth and compassion and shelter. And as a tree of wisdom, you can whisper to the ones like the Buddha seeking freedom and awakening. You can whisper some words of understanding and wisdom. What do you have to teach? What do you have to tell us humans? We are ready to listen. And finally, we as humans say thank you. Thank you for letting us join you as a tree. Thank you for your wisdom, your gifts. We make a bow to all the trees of this world. That sustain us. Gratitude, love. When you're ready, allow your eyes to open. And look out as a human being and a tree. So next, before I ask you, Rajiv, for what you would add, I'd like to see if anyone wants to describe how that meditation was for you. And as I ask this, James has a mic. I need to say that there are 108,000 kinds of meditation, and some fit for a moment, and some are not the right one for you. The one thing you don't want to do in meditation is use it to judge yourself. You're already too good at that, right? So if something interesting happened or it was helpful, great. If it wasn't, there are lots of other practices. So raise your hand. Anything you saw, what the tree had to say, how it was. You'll be,
Hello?
yep.
I was surprised by my compassion for the humans. They were small and so brief in their
Yes.
time. So I
Yes.
felt a lot of compassion for them.
Thank you. Small and so brief. Anyone else?
I think it's on now. Hi. um,
If you could stand up, that would be
Okay.
really cool. Thank you. Hi.
It was very moving. I often think about the survival and resilience of my ancestors and my lineage, and how I'm here because so many people found a way to make meaning and survive so much suffering. And I had a parallel experience of that with the tree, sort of thinking about what it's like to experience loss as a human, and also what that would be like as a tree. But to know, I was imagining the rings expanding, to know that, you know, I'll be here as long as I am, but I'm also, my growth is inspired by the growth around me and the resilience. So feeling that as a tree was pretty cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is like deep ancestors, you know, it's so important to honor ancestors, and this is just going back another generation.
Hi, dear.
Hi,
It's so good to see you, dear Jack.
great to see you.
Yeah, thank you. It was a beautiful meditation. And I'll just say what the tree seemed to say to me now. Was it the tree or was it me? But the tree simply said one sentence: stop acting crazy.
This is a very sensible tree. We like this. One more, please.
Thank you for this meditation. I think, well, I also had a favorite tree growing up. And so I imagined myself as that tree. And the tree was like seeing me as I am now, like 20 something years later. And I appreciate what you said about us being so brief. And it was a conversation like with myself as the tree and this body and the mycelium. And that was really beautiful. And I felt connected to all the trees in here. We were a forest. Yay.
Thank you. So for those that it was helpful, and again, you know, it might be so for half of you, and the other half, it'll be a different practice. The gift of inner practices is that they take us out of our ordinary consciousness of the shopping list, right? And the tasks that we have to do, and, you know, all the thinking mind stuff that fills our days. And even in a few minutes, allow us to drop outside of or beyond that sense of separateness and feel the connection that we have to life itself, because it's actually who you are. So I've been blabbing for a while, and now it's, see what you want to add. Or I have questions for you too, Rajiv, which in a way, how does this connect with the work that you're doing? Or what are you learning that uplifts people? Anything.
Well, shortly after I had that seizure, I hadn't worked so much in climate, to be honest. And I was asked by Christiana to write this inquiry into the future of climate action, the decisive decade, as part of this initiative that was formed one day after the Paris Agreement was gavelled, it was a mission. I think we're all part of that mission. Mission 2020, now Mission 2025, probably lifelong. And I said, well, why me? I don't really know so much about climate change. I don't know what we should do next. And I remember her and the team around saying, that's why we're asking you. But we spent 2 years on this inquiry, and we didn't focus on any silver bullet solution. It wasn't this particular carbon dioxide removal technology or any one solution. But the report was entitled Organizing Climate Action, Catalytic Collaboration for Systemic Change. And it acknowledged that the biggest obstacle to addressing the challenge was our ability to organize ourselves as a species. And when you look at when we put a man on the moon, we didn't start with any one propulsion technology. The first thing that happened was an association was set up to figure out how do 6,000 different types of actors coordinate themselves to work together. And within this inquiry, we had 3 core insights. The first was, as a community, we're always very clear what we're against, but we are not always so clear on what we're for, and we need a unifying narrative. And I would argue that some of what's in regeneration, which folks like Juliana Birnbaum, who's here and put together one of the most comprehensive database of solutions ever assembled, which builds and draw down people like Shanna Rappaport and Amanda Joy Ravenhill, others who are part of this community have assembled, women in particular, are the beginnings of that narrative. That we do need to work across generations. That this isn't something that can be addressed by any one generation. Jack talked earlier about the stewardship of this space and how the stewardship was passing toward new generations that were going to take it forward. But how do we do that while also acknowledging that the wisdom of the elders is so precious, and that we need that wisdom, and at the same time the mind of a young leader that is fresh and not contaminated with experience is so critical.
What a great phrase, huh? Fantastic.
How do we create that intergenerational collaboration and regeneration? I think really reflects that notion that this isn't just any one generation's responsibility. It's all of our responsibility, and we have to regenerate. But also, regeneration is a principle, a practice, a process. And as we deeply delve into it, we start to realize that as a spiritual principle, there's a real depth to it. The second insight we had was that we needed to build trust within and between civil society and business, governments, those most affected. And right now, trust is extremely fragmented. We need to learn how to build bridges, not walls. And that skill, that capability to build bridges in the most difficult of contexts requires a depth of compassion. And my sense is that places like Spirit Rock, Plum Village, they can really help us as leaders understand how to practice compassion as a verb. And in a moment like this, where it's easy to vilify, it's easy to other, it's easy to blame, we have to find a way to practice radical compassion. And only through this act of radical compassion will we find the other side of that mountain, where I believe there still is hope. Then the third insight was we need accountability. We need to strengthen accountability. And that means we need to be willing to be assertive. We need to be willing to speak up when there is injustice, to act with right action, thoughtfully, intentionally, as a community, considering, even though it may have risks, what would it take to confront that which would destroy what we hold most dear? And so how do we strengthen accountability? Those were the three core insights. And then on top of that, we had this framework where we identified key actors. We called them the decisive seven. But it was a notion that we need to be conscious that we're just one actor in an ecosystem. And whether you're a funder, and I think there's some philanthropy here, which is setting the playing field, or whether you're an activist, or part of a movement like Extinction Rebellion that is providing a shaking and awareness-raising role, or whether you're part of a think tank that is providing analysis or a frameworker that's helping figure out the standards, all of us have a critical role to play if we want to drive system change. And we can only advance, though, when we're fully conscious of the contributions that each of us play, and highlighting positive examples, figuring out how do you orchestrate those various players to work together is the deep work. And I feel that the biggest opportunity we have is in spaces like this and in other places is to, as we work through the inner work and let go and detach, to find the energy within us with fresh eyes, as Joanna Macy would say, and I think we're going to spend more time on that tomorrow, with fresh eyes, having examined our own suffering, to reimagine the world anew and to understand what does it take to work together to build that future, to provide people with something else that is compelling, that is hopeful, that is tangible, that's practical. And then how do we practice it as a community? Because that's the best way to demonstrate that what we are coming together for is something that others can also attain. And even if it's universal basic income, we talk a lot about these policies. What would it look like to practice some form of universal basic income within a Sangha? Can we take some of these ideas and experiment with them? And I think that's the invitation that I would have is I think the last thing I would say is, last insight was my very first gathering for the Plum Village community was after my wife and I had been hit by a car. She broke her neck in 3 places and was left in a walker after an operation. Our baby was 6 months old. Thankfully, he was not in the car. I was unable to walk. My spine was damaged also in many places. And Adam, who's here, and others will remember, I arrived in Hollyhock with an inability to walk. And I'd actually just been holding it together, and I was kind of moving until I was getting on the flight to Hollyhock. And the flight was cancelled. And somehow I managed to get there. There was a Hollyhock participant who had a seaplane who brought me in, and it was, and I managed to, move through that suffering. And if it wasn't for that space of examining and doing the inner work, I myself would not, even though I had been examining all of this in theory, have understood the truth that all of this, all that we're reading, all that we're learning, the more that we practice it in our own lives, the more that we can start to see transformation happening. And the more that it ripples out and the lives of those around us starts to shift. My wife then came with me on our Plum Village retreat. She's now, with a stick, without a walker. And we can't underestimate the connection between care for one's spiritual body and the impact on one's physical body. And as much as we want to transform the world, if we don't change ourselves, we might not inspire those around us and then perhaps change the system. So start at home.
So when I hear the accident, and I'm so sorry to hear it, and you got through it in the way that you could for yourself and your wife, and went to Hollyhock and to Plum Village. What kind of inner practices did you draw on? What was helpful?
Well, besides some very strong painkillers,
Thank you.
I would say that for me, I've never been a huge sitter. I'm probably the most inflexible Indian. I would always ask, my mom would be like, can you not do a little yoga? And I could never even cross my legs as a kid. And I always believed that, the only way to do this, and sit in my parents were raised, my mom was raised Muslim, my father was raised Hindu Brahmin, and my grandmother started the first Hindu temple in India, in Scotland. And so even though we were raised Scottish Baptist, so we'd go to church on a Sunday and then we'd go to the temple. And I was made for the pews in the church because I could never sit on the floor in the temple. And so I had this in my mind. I had this view that the only way to practice is to sit and breathe, and I felt so uncomfortable every time I did it. And I thought, if this is the way to enlightenment, I don't know how I'm going to get there. And and I got to Hollyhock, and I was speaking to, I was listening, and then they started talking about this walking meditation. I said, wow, walking is my favorite thing to do. I love walking, and when I'm walking, I feel connected. I feel really clear. My mind clears. I also like showering meditation. Christiana talked about brushing your teeth meditation. And I thought, wait a second, this is not just about sitting. And so to answer your question, for me, the practice is every moment. And realizing, and of course you drift, but realizing that in every moment, there's something available to us. Something very special that's available to us, and that is the moment itself. And that even as we gather here, our minds may go back to the past. There's so much trauma, there's so much pain. We think, should we have done that? Should I have done this? Did I do that job properly, or did I get it wrong? Or then we think to the future, what are we planning? We've got UN Climate Week coming up. I'm going to take some calls. But actually, the only real moment that we have to do anything is now. And we have this next few days together. In every moment, we have this potential opportunity to connect, to create ripples, not knowing where those ripples might end up. And so for me, it's the present moment, really understanding what is this present moment, because it's really the only thing we know. And Jack, I wanted to ask you a question, because Spirit Rock fascinated me when I graciously received this invitation, and that, again, was kind of like when I was writing the Decisive Decade Inquiry, I was like, why me? Why would you like me to come to Spirit Rock? And I wondered, with all the wisdom that has been cultivated here, through the teachings and the practices, all your wonderful writing and examination, what are some of the insights that you think would be most valuable for a community of climate leaders and activists and organizers and practitioners who in this precise moment are grappling with this question of what can we do?
Small question. What the hell can we do? First, I just love your Dharma teachings of living in the present moment, because it is the truth. It's all we have is this moment. One of the things that's helpful is to not be afraid of suffering. You know, we're always looking at how do we make it all better or something like that. And I remember when I first arrived at my teacher Ajahn Chah's forest monastery, the province on the border of Cambodia and Laos during the American part of the Vietnam War, and there were fighter jets and bombers going overhead, but it was a place of peace. He said, they fight, but we want to show people that there's a whole other way. Anyway, I came to the gate. I'd come as a layperson, but then I got my robes in the village temple where I had been living on the Peace Corps. And he said, "You come." I nodded. And then he said, "I hope you're not afraid to suffer." That's a funny greeting, you know? Like, what kind of greeting is that? And he smiled and he said, there are two kinds of suffering. The kind that you run away from and it follows you everywhere. And the kind that you're willing to turn and face and go through, and that becomes your gateway to liberation. So part of what meditation teaches us is to expand what the neuroscientists call, to expand the window of tolerance, so we can actually be with our grief and our longing and our love and our tears and our hope and all of that, and not be afraid of it. So Francis Lam, who runs the MIT Media Lab that does all kinds of creative things, including partly looking at the future of agriculture. Maybe you know this story, Rajiv. Anyway, one of his students came and said, since you're trying to make new seeds and species that will help us in the future and feed humanity, could we try playing music for the plants? And being a good scientist, he said, well, we can't just play music for them. We have to make an experiment. So they divided. He said, divide your plants. One goes in the greenhouse where it's silent. What kind of music do you want to play? Mozart. Okay, the plants get Mozart. Third greenhouse, Tupac. Okay. And then they plant the seeds and they let them grow. Do you know which plants grew the best? Tupac. And the reason was because the beat and the energy of that pushed them around and they grew stronger roots. You tree people, that you became the tree. This is part of what contemplative practice, yes, it dissolves the sense of separateness, but it also increases your capacity to be present for the unbearable beauty and ocean of tears that happen to be human experience. So that's the first thing, is somehow not to be afraid of suffering. And then secondly, to realize it's not the end of the story, because we can also get lost in the fear and the grief and all of those things, which we'll work with. This is the instructions from the Buddha, where he says, live in joy, in love, even among those who hate. Live in joy, in health, even among the afflicted. Live in joy, in peace, even among the troubled. No, look within, be still, free from fear and attachment, know the sweet joy of living in the way, living in the Dharma. This is radical instruction to say to you, it's not just philosophy. The world is as it is. It's got suffering and beauty in unbelievable measure. And how are you going to tend your heart? If you go into a refugee camp to work and you're frightened and grieving and so forth, it doesn't help people very much. They'd actually rather have a more upbeat person come. They already have enough trouble. It's true. So here's one of my favorite poems from the great poet Jack Gilbert, who died a few years ago, called A Brief for the Defense. And it's tough. Sorrow everywhere, slaughter everywhere. If babies are not starving someplace, they're starving somewhere else, with flies in their nostrils. But we enjoy our lives because that's also what the gods want. Otherwise, the mornings before lavender summer dawn would not be made so fine, and the Bengal tiger would not be fashioned orange and black so miraculously well. The poor women at the fountain are laughing together between the suffering they've known and the awfulness in their village, laughing even as someone is sick nearby. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight. We can do without pleasure seeking, but not delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. If the locomotive of the Lord runs us down, we should give thanks that the end had magnitude. We must admit there will be music despite everything. If we make injustice the only measure of our attention, we praise the devil. And so this is a really powerful invitation to not avert your gaze, to actually be willing to see, and then in that to respond, because the heart wants to respond if you're fearless enough to do that. So when Joanna Macy, who we've been talking about a lot and love, and she's kind of woven in the fabric of this gathering into climate. Shortly after she died, I went over to sit with her body, and going to her house, the house was turned into a temple. Constance, you would know, I'm sure you were there, others, and people were gathered, and it was sort of a modest house in the flat part of Berkeley. And out on the sidewalk, people were greeting you with welcome and with prayers. And then you went up the steps to the porch, which had all these candles. It was really turned into a temple. And then on the porch, they smudged you and did more blessings to purify you. And then you went up the stairs inside, which had more candles. And at the top, there was someone who gave you another little prayer and a blessing, and then said, this is the room for meditation, and this is a room for telling stories about Joanna. And then when you're ready, you can go and sit with her body. So I did all of that. And then I went and sat with her body. And there were a few people in the room there quietly. And she was laying there, 96 years old, covered in flower petals, like being in Varanasi or something, all these flower petals, and a basket of flower petals to add to it. And I chanted from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, remember who you really are, let go into the light, blah, blah, blah. You know that stuff, right? I did some other beautiful chants for her and some kind of Buddhist teachings and instructions for making transition. And then I sat quietly and I listened. And after a little while, Joanna said, 80, you got to keep going. That's nothing. Okay, don't back off, keep going. So I got this transmission from Joanna. I thought, all right, because there's this little turning 80, maybe I should relax or whatever. She didn't. She just kept doing it. And she said, yes, meditation. And yes, change the world. Both. That was her song, was like the two wings of the bird. So I went the back stairs down into the yard, and it was a good, proper funeral, if you will, celebration. They were cooking food, and people were making music and telling stories and all those good things. And people were really close to her. A couple of friends said, Joanna was just such a lover. She wrote a book, World is Lover, World is Self. She loved food. We would take her to all these restaurants, and she loved cooking. She loved the outdoors. We'd go to all these amazing places and adventures in the outdoors. She loved music. She loved sex. She loved community. She loved engaging with people, all these things. I took it in. Next day, I went to Whole Foods and I was shopping, and there was a big chocolate thing that I love, but I thought for my diet, not a good idea. And then I heard Joanna say, go for it. If you're going to do it right. And I bought the chocolate thing, right? And then the day after that, should I go online and do these teachings and whatever, or maybe I should kick? Joanna said, you do it. Okay, so I agreed, activism, I got to do that. And Joanna is now kind of here, like a muse. And the most beautiful thing, all those are beautiful gifts, but one of the most beautiful things that I get from her is a sense of wonder, which is really in her DNA, in who she was. The fact that buildings exist. I know all the people the iron workers and the people who made this and everybody who helped make it happen, and the trees that were cut and milled to make the ceiling, and the fact that this land has been here and sheltered the deer and the bear and all the things before this. And the fact that we're here at all is completely wild. It's such a mystery. And she's there just saying, don't take it for granted. Look and see, this is amazing that it exists and that you exist. And don't forget that wonder. And then look at how weird all these people are. They are. Me too, of course. That's because the cosmic creativity says, here, let's make some more creative things. See what this is like. And that sense of wonder of the world, even as I drive and I go, wow, bridges, aren't they amazing? They didn't exist for now. We have the Golden Gate Bridge, cool. Joanna has gifted me not just her teachings, and I've been with many great teachers, and she's certainly one of them, but with that spirit that has the joy in it, that's not just, oh, we have to kind of make climate change a new grim duty, right? Forget that. Molly Ivins, the wonderful activist and, journalist and so forth in Texas, when she died, she said, so keep fighting for freedom and justice, beloveds, but don't forget to have fun doing it. Be outrageous, rejoice in all the oddities that freedom allows for us. And when you get through celebrating and collaborating, the sheer joy of that good fight to transform everything, be sure to tell those who came afterward how much fun you had. And that's Joanna's spirit. So those are a couple of messages, not to be afraid, to actually realize it's your birthright to open your heart to all of it, because it's you. To learn that and to smile. Actually, it's funny because, Thich Nhat Hanh has that whole thing, you meditate and then you put a little half smile on your lips. And at first I was like, what's this? It's sort of like saccharine, meditation you got to do. I was, I was a young man in the ascetic monasteries. Is there anything difficult to do around here? You know how young men are. They're kind of like, anyway, and he's smiling. So I was having lunch with him one day, and I said, why do you teach smiling? I like it now, by the way. I recommend it. But I asked him, I said, why do you teach smiling? And I could feel that he actually carried a lot of grief also, quite honestly, when you were with him, that you could feel too. And he looked back and he said, I've seen so much suffering. He said, I have to teach something bigger than that. I have to do this, which is why I teach people to smile. And that smile, when you meditate, you become the Buddha smiling under the Bodhi tree, seeing the whole 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, and said, here I am, with eyes open to see the mystery of things playing and resting in the great heart of compassion that holds it all. So there's a bit of an answer for your question. What do you have to add to it?
Well, there was there's a famous Scottish economist who we might blame for some of what we see around us, but I don't believe it was his fault. I think we decided to pick and choose what he said. Adam Smith, and he wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, but before he wrote that, he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in it, he wrote, how selfish soever a man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his character that interest him in the fortunes of others and render their happiness necessary to him, though he gains nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. And I remember in all my studies in economics, that one paragraph for me was a greater synthesis of his thesis. Because we can talk about invisible hands, we can talk about so many other concepts, but he was pointing at something, another force which motivates our behavior. And Einstein says not everything that measures counts, not everything that counts can be measured. But I think he was pointing to love. And when I first arrived at that meditation in Hollyhock, hobbling, using my tummy muscles to try and keep me up, I remember this concept of when Brother Spirit, because I'd become part of this journey around regeneration. I'd written alongside the Decisive Decade with Christiana, we crowdsourced this vision, which we were writing in the midst of the pandemic, and we called it a prelude to the great regeneration, because we believed that the pandemic was a window, a portal to a new reality, and that it may not be defined as the pandemic or the depression, but that in years and eons gone by, we may look back at this era as a moment of great regeneration. And Brother Phap Hu, who's the abbot at Plum Village, and after Thai's passing, has been stewarding the community, said, Raj, I believe love is regeneration. And so we started a little circle and we were sharing. And it's true to me that all of the things that we're doing, and I was, partly involved with the whole regeneration process in this beautiful select library of solutions. But at the end of it all, love is this unbelievable, inexplicable force. And when there's love, it's almost like anything is possible. just like I see my 4-year-old boy and he's like the love in him. I would do anything for that 4-year-old boy. And it's the love that binds all things. And Take That Hand also, I think, talks about this concept of paper and looking at the paper and seeing in the paper the rain and the trees and that even though you're looking at paper, you're looking at rain. And that everything that innately will be manifest is already there. And I think for me that was a very powerful insight, because it means that perhaps, just perhaps, everything we need to manifest the future we want and the future we need as a species, all of that is already here if we look deeply enough. And out of scarcity, we're like, we need philanthropy, or we need this, or we need that. But if we look within and if we look at each other, perhaps we just start to find the elements that we need to assemble. And as we assemble, perhaps we might just find that there's a lot of power in this community. And perhaps that power could help the world shift in a totally different direction.
So I'd like to invite us, because you talked so much about the importance of also collective action and connection and community. I'd like to invite those of you in this room and those of you online to make little groups of 3 or 4 people and to take the next 15 minutes. That's probably good. Could be 12. Whoever is working the magic for the online communities to help people divide into groups of 3 or 4 with this prompt: what is uplifting and gives you hope? And what is your best intention at this time? What uplifts and gives you hope? And from this, what would be your best intention? There's something quite magic about expressing it. It's one thing to hold it in the heart. It's another to share it with one another. So if you would turn and make little groups here, and if you're online, and if we can do it, put folks into groups of 3 or 4, and you have 12 to 15 minutes. We'll see how it goes.
Should I mute it?
Take a minute to finish up.
I was so early in this journey. Yeah. And then I was reading it on the internet.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, all these books and
Yeah.
what am I going to prepare?
Well, you prepared yourself for the last 50 years. How old are you? 40?
41.
Yeah. The last 40 years. Okay, please finish up. Turn back from your new best friends.
Kornfield said to send love to you.
Who took-
Kornfield.
Take a breath. Settle yourself back. Thank your fellow travelers.
Wow.
Ah. You know, I can kind of feel the goodness in the room from that conversation. It has a certain delicious scent to it. So thank you for that. What I'd like us to do is a little bit of listening to you, both those in the room, but also some of you who are online, and maybe we can kind of alternate. What did you hear in your group, or what did you say, or what touched you? Raise your hand. First, we'll start with someone in the room, then we'll get someone online. How was that? Somebody put their thumbs up in the back. There's someone. Great.
Thank you. Hey, can y'all hear me all right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that was really wonderful. It was just an absolute treat. We talked about, it felt like a very wide array of things. Just being able to recognize, kind of enjoy in a Macy spirit, these heavy subjects, but with joy and smiling. I even realized I forgot to bring bubbles. And I'm like, shoot, that would have been great to have this week. And yeah, and also this, I think we had a wide array of ages, and being able to appreciate the wisdom of elderhood, and being able to share that with maybe some of the enthusiasm and energy of youth. But that there was a really an exchange of both, and being able to see people who had courage to pursue things that are daunting. And yeah, just a very neat conversation, and a lot of gratitude. At least from my end, I hope.
Thank you. Thank you. All that, cross-generational especially. All right, let's see if someone online would like to speak. Can we do that? I don't know how this works, but
Ernest?
Ileana?
Hello, Jack.
Hi, Ernie.
Yeah, I don't have much of a reaction. I have a question, which I would like to hear from the two of you. Some very practical ways, very concrete ways we can deal with this onslaught of horror coming from Washington. Things we can do and not do that will really help me survive the next however long.
You want a practical way to deal with the onslaught of the news. Turn off the damn news. I'm serious. But let's see what Rajiv has to say to start. I'll toss him the hot potato.
Well, I think Jack actually answered the question in a short conversation we were having while you were talking. And I think we were reflecting on Ram Dass, in fact, and we talked about the importance of loving people and feeding them. And I just wonder if, like, in this moment, the quiet revolution is getting together in each other's homes. You know, the Scottish Enlightenment which was this period of history where Scotland invented a crazy amount of things, like the television, the telephone, penicillin. They say the Declaration of Arbroath was the basis of the Declaration of Independence in terms of democracy.
The Scottish invented everything, right?
Apparently,
them,
yeah.
Them and the Chinese.
And the Indians, of course, yeah.
Okay.
All made in. But they say it was because of the whiskey societies. And I'm not advocating that we all start drinking whiskey. But there was a social technology of meeting together in safe space and bringing different perspectives together and sharing and creating space to imagine. And I don't know if I have the answer to what to do with Washington, but I just feel that we have to free ourselves to meet and allow that to be a quiet act of resistance and to create the space to organize and to free ourselves from the concept that doing so requires a significant amount of resources. Because by cooking for each other, bringing and sharing, however we do it, I actually think many of the patchwork solutions will emerge.
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you.
Well, what you're saying is really something you said during your talk, which is do it out of love, not out of hate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, in the room, anyone else from your group, what you heard, what you said? Share a hand over here. Great.
Hi. First of all, I want to say I lived in Scotland.
Keep it close to your mouth.
Sorry. I lived in Scotland at a similar time that you did, it sounds like, Raji, and it was a very amazing time for organizing on progressive issues. So thank you for the work that you did. Our group talked a little bit about solutions and how encouraging it is that actually for a long time the story was we don't have the solutions, we don't have the answers to how to solve the climate crisis. And one of the things that we all spoke about is how actually now this feeling that we do have the answers, both from some really incredible work that's been done in the last 20, 30 years, and also through, as we discussed today, looking back to other cultures, other communities that have always had solutions to these problems. And so that it doesn't feel like we're dealing with this kind of black box question anymore. But I actually also had a question which is sort of building off of that, which is, when I think about the future that we could create, it's beautiful. It's so wonderful. It's so much better and richer and more connected than the life that we necessarily live today. And I'm curious why we're struggling so hard to bring people along with that vision and to share that vision to huge pieces of the population. So I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that, but that's something I'm very curious about.
It's interesting. In the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha almost never answered the why question. He was much more practical and spoke about the how question. We have the circumstance we're in. As a psychologist, I would say a lot of it is based on fear. Maybe there are these two channels for human beings, love and fear. Love is the connection and fear is the separation out of which all the other troubles arise. And perhaps some of our work is to both acknowledge that fear honorably and compassionately, and then to shine the light that there's another way.
In The Matrix, I don't know if you've seen The Matrix. They talk about how they created the first Matrix. And in the first Matrix, everything was perfect. And for some reason, it failed. And so they had to create this other Matrix where things weren't so perfect. And there was a little bit of suffering. And I learned later in life that my name Rajiv in Sanskrit means lotus. And Brother Phap told me that when you take the lotus out of the mud, it perishes. That it's only because of the mud that the lotus has the nourishment that it needs to become this beautiful lotus. And I don't know if I'm answering a question. I'm trying to, but what I would say is that perhaps the reason that we're failing is that sometimes we paint a picture that is almost too far from reality for people to grasp onto. And we got to find a way to reach people authentically and in a way that speaks truth to the reality that they are already facing. And I think other parts of our society in Washington and elsewhere have managed to, in a way, appeal to people's sense of frustrations. And we need to kind of tweak that a little bit. And so utopia may not be the answer. We got to figure out, with the trade-offs that need to be made, we still have to find ways to pay for things. We still have to find ways to look after our most vulnerable. How can we protect, and as I said, probably why I collapsed. How do we deal with inequality on the one hand and catastrophic climate change and loss of nature on the other hand? Because when I speak to communities in the Global South, for example, they say, in Africa, for example, can't transition in the dark. 800 million people don't have access to electricity. And so we have to find a way to, I think, confront these very real questions as we navigate this transition from a very extractive system with the military-industrial complex and all that comes with it, towards a regenerative system that has sacred reciprocity and all of the values that we are striving for, but in a way that, as the Buddha would have said, acknowledges the power of the middle way. I think the challenge for us is how can we articulate the middle way that transcends this polarization and kind of appeals to the purple, which perhaps may be a much larger community of the population than we believe.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We're kind of winding down, and your answer was a beautiful platform, if you will, for engagement that is both inner and outer and not separating the two. Underneath, I'll go back to the reality of fear and separation, because a lot of what's happening, whether you say in Washington or other capitals, is also promoting separation and fear, as if it were real, as if we were separate in some way. And what I feel in this room, and from what your work has been, and the kind of teachings that we're drawing on, there's another deeper truth that we know. And that no political movement and no injustice, all of which need to be tended to, can turn us from that reality that we're connected. It's the truth. I have a little passage that I'll read you, and then maybe we'll sit together unless there's something more you want to add as we close. And it's interesting, I have to be careful to read it in the way that one takes the words of an elder. This is from Bill Nijedi, who is an Aboriginal Australian stockman. And it's kind of his way of speaking, partly chanting and singing the song lines. And so you can listen almost as a meditation. Well, I'll tell you about this story, about story where you feel. Listen carefully this. You can hear me. I telling you because earth, just like mother and father and brother of you, that tree, the same thing. Your body, my body, I suppose. I'm same as you, everyone. Tree working when you sleeping and dream. Daytime sun working for you. Nighttime star, he working there, see? He working, I can see. Always at night, if you lie down, look up, careful. He working, see? When you sleep, bloody pumping, so you look, star, he go pink, he come white, see him work, he work. In the night you dream, lay down, that star, he working for you. Tree, grass, everything working for you. We are embedded in vastness and something so mysterious and so connected. And we feel ourselves small and separate, but that's not the big reality. He working for you, this man says, this elder, this visionary. The world is working to breathe you and feed you and love you. And you get to do it back. You get to be part of that weave. So I am grateful to you, Rajiv, for your lifetime's work, kind of extraordinary to hear. I'm grateful for all of you for coming together, for all of you who are online and listening. The love in the room is really palpable. And it's the great power. So thank you all for attending, those online, and for you who are on the retreat. This is just the beginning. Something will be unfolding over the days ahead.
Life conspiring for life.
I like it. I like it. Did you want to say something, Alyssa?
Yes, thank you. It's so beautiful. And this question about hope, a lot of us have hope for our next, hope from the youth and the next generation. They give us hope and they suffer so much. They carry the burden. And we have a lot of young people here, our UC students. I was wondering if we could get a picture of you two with our students, our next generation.
Could we get a picture of the two of us? The old guy, the middle-aged guy, early middle age, by the way. You're just starting it. And the young people who are here. We will do that. Meanwhile, the rest of you are welcome to stand, thank each other, those online to smile. Your picture, that's right. We love you. We're so grateful that you're part of this community, and we're cheering you on.
Thank you.
Anybody who counts themselves as young, and I don't mean young in spirit, come on up.
Take this. Oh, I'll take